What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video. Today we're going to be going over the Warden healer. So much like the Templars, Warden healers are pretty much one of the most desired healers in endgame content because of the various amount of group buffs that they're able to provide that are unique or more easily available on a Warden compared to some other classes. So it's very common to see in endgame raid groups one Templar healer and then another Warden healer as their sort of healer specs. So definitely very powerful. Not much has changed between Dragonhold and Harrowstorm. None of the sets that were introduced really made their way into the healer's toolkit because they didn't really provide anything new or anything at all really that would help benefit group DPS. So the build that you're seeing today is going to be very similar to the one that I released in Dragonhold with a few minor tweaks here and there as I've picked up a couple of things from other healers to help kind of fine-tune this build. So like the rest of our build videos, we won't be going over any sort of gear that is covered in the gear video for healers, which will be popping up in the upper right hand corner right about now. So if you're interested in knowing what gear you should be running as a healer, which set you should have on hand, feel free to check out that video and then come back here in order to know what skills you want to have on hand as a Warden. We'll also be covering kind of a surface look at what healing entails in ESO and what makes Warden healers different from other classes. Let's go ahead and get started here with skills on our front bar, which is our Restoration Staff bar. We have Illustrious Healing. We are using the Massive Restoration Staff, so we do need to use it. Even if you're not running the Massive Restoration Staff, you should still have Illustrious Healing on hand. This is just a very long-lasting heal over time, which is pretty beneficial, obviously, to have, because a lot of healing in ESO is kind of centered around layering down a lot of heal over time abilities, also known as HOTS. Next we have Combat Prayer. This acts as a burst heal as well as a source of minor berserk. Because Wardens have an AoE burst heal, you don't really need to use Combat Prayer as a burst heal. You're going to mainly be using it in order to maintain the minor berserk buff on your allies, which improves their damage done by a pretty hefty margin, 8% here base, which ends up translating to about 6 to 5% depending on total damage done modifiers on your DPS. Next, we have Fetter Infection, which applies minor vulnerability to anybody who is affected by it. So it also counts as a dot for Zen, so kind of fits into a lot of different sort of builds, healer sets and things like that. So definitely a very strong ability. Now, unlike Lotus Fan from a Nightblade, this does not apply AoE minor vulnerability. The other morph also does not apply minor vulnerability. So Growing Swarm, for example, this only affects the boss that you've targeted with minor vulnerability, so it doesn't hit everybody else, unlike Lotus Fan. So it is only a single target application of minor vulnerability, which is not that big of a deal, because usually if you're using Lotus Fan for AoE minor vulnerability, it's going to be on a tank, not necessarily a Nightblade healer. Next we have Enchanted Growth. This is your burst AoE heal. So this is unique to the Wardens. It also provides minor intellect and minor endurance, improving sustain for all of your DPS. So it's good to be able to hit this at the very least every 20 seconds or so, just in order to give them that minor intellect and minor endurance. Then we have Energy Orb, which acts as a heal over time, as well as additional resource return from the Combustion synergy. Very powerful heal. It's one of the strongest heals in the game if you're just taking a look at healing done per second. So definitely want to run this. And then for our ultimate, we have Enchanted Forest as sort of an emergency heal. Because it's a very low-cost ultimate, it only costs 90 ultimate. You can essentially more or less treat this as an emergency burst heal as needed, but you can swap this out for other ultimates on an as-needed basis. Next, for our back bar, we have Blue Betty here for the Magicka return, as well as the Purge. You don't necessarily need to run Blue Betty for Magicka return. If you're finding difficulty in sustaining your Magicka, then by all means run Blue Betty, but a lot of healers, you should be able to manage your own Magicka sufficiently between heavy attacks, and that you don't necessarily need to run Blue Betty at all. Next we have Corrupting Pollen. Now I do want to take a little bit of time to discuss Corrupting Pollen versus Budding Seeds. So Budding Seeds has a small heal over time while the flowers are growing. Corrupting Pollen does not have that. It only afflicts enemies inside the field with Major Defile, which is of no use in PvE. However, a lot of Warden healers tend to use Corrupting Pollen rather than Budding Seeds. And the reason for that is Corrupting Pollen does not require you to hit the button again in order to get the burst heal going. So one of the things that Wardens provide is a unique synergy, the Harvest synergy through Budding Seeds or Corrupting Pollen. Once the Harvest synergy is used, nobody else is able to activate that synergy. So if you're using Budding Seeds and somebody activates the Harvest synergy right away, you need to hit the Budding Seeds again in order to remove the ability effect that's already been placed, and then recast it a second time in order to provide Harvest again. So basically you need to hit the button twice, essentially using 2 global cooldowns to apply a second Harvest synergy. Compared to the Corrupting Pollen, where if they hit the Harvest synergy, one, the effect doesn't disappear for either of them, so you still get the burst heal at the end. But instead of using 2 global cooldowns in order to get another Harvest energy up, you only need to recast it once. Yes, you will end up missing the burst heal at the end if you do that with Corrupting Pollen, but you will have enough heal over times layered down that it's not that big of a deal. Plus, you already have a burst heal with Enchanted Growth. So Corrupting Pollen just allows you to put more of them down on the field in a given space and time, allowing for more people to use the Harvest synergy, which helps out if you have a lot of stamina DPS running like Kestis, and also helps the tank get Alkosh uptimes up a little bit better. Then we have Expansive Frost Cloak to give everybody major resolve. It's always nice to have. I recommend Warden healers always to run this ability, but you don't necessarily have to if your DPS already have a source of major resolve somehow. Then obviously you don't need to run this. Then we have Blockade of Storms, help proc or enchant and maintain off balance, and then we have Elemental Drain for the Major Breach and Minor Magicka Steel. You can swap this out as needed if there's other sources of Major Breach and Minor Magicka Steel. Then, of course, we have Aggressive Warhorn for the Major Force buff. Now, in terms of other abilities to run, if you need some additional mitigation from AoE attacks, you can slot Deceptive Predator, which gives you minor evasion. It's one of, I think, the only sources of minor evasion in the game that are not a set. So you get a 10% additional mitigation from AoE attacks, which is very beneficial. A lot of attacks in Trials and Dungeons are counted as AoE attacks, so it does actually cover quite a long list of abilities to get you a little bit more mitigation that way. Under the green balance line, these 3 abilities, Living Vines, Lotus Flower, and Nature's Grasp, they're all fairly situationally useful. You will use probably Bursting Vines if you are the Cage healer in Lakessi's hard mode, but even then you can use Enchanted Growth, so you don't necessarily need to run Nature's Grasp, either of the morphs. Lotus Flower, while you could use it as basically another heal over time, you do need to be able to weave appropriately. So while it is decent, it's not really something I would say is necessary for a Warden healer because you already have a lot of heal over times down, so you don't really need to use it. The Living Vines just applies minor lifesteal. It also does apply basically an effect where they get healed every time they take damage, which is pretty decent, but generally speaking, not all that beneficial because even though you can essentially treat it as damage reduction, it only affects one person at a time. If it affected a lot of people, then sure, it'd be a great ability to use, but then it'd be way overpowered. And then a minor lifesteal, you can already apply that through other better means, better abilities essentially. So I don't really see Living Vines, either morph, really being very beneficial. And then there's nothing much under the Winter's Embrace line to really cover, except Northern Storm, which gives you major protection. Permafrost as well provides major protection while you have the storm around you. So if you do need some source of major protection, for example, if you're progressing something and you need the additional mitigation for high damage scenarios, then you can run Northern Storm or Permafrost. It's kind of up to you which one you want to morph. You want to pick. Northern Storm is going to be a little bit more applicable because it boosts your max damage while you have it active, or just say for 30 seconds after you activate it. So that's going to be a little bit better for you. But if you do PvP a lot, then Permafrost might be a little bit better. I'm not sure whether it's still used in PvP or not. Under the weapons line, not much else under the Destro staff line except maybe Crushing Shock as a ranged interrupt in case you do need it. Restoration staff line, you have Radiating Regeneration, which is great for 4-man content. It basically is a heal over time for 3 people. So pretty nice to have. Then you have Healing Ward or Ward Ally. Especially if you're using the Black Rose Prison Restoration Staff, you will need to run this. You can essentially treat this more or less as a heal over time or even as a burst heal even. The shield that it provides is actually not terrible. Because of the way shields work, you can pretty much treat it as temporary health. So it's actually not that bad, and it does increase based on how bad somebody is damaged. And if you have Healing Ward, the target is healed for a certain percentage of the shield's remaining strength every second. So it does act as a nice heal over time if there's not a lot of damage coming out. For example, if you hit it right after a big damage wave comes out, and there might not be damage coming in for 2 to 3 seconds, yeah, that's a pretty decent heal over time that you just managed to put on somebody. Then we have Force Siphon. Either Quick Siphon or Siphon Spirit has their uses. It's just a way to apply minor lifesteal. Siphon Spirit gives you minor magic steal. Quick Siphon provides minor expedition when somebody is healed by the minor lifesteal. The movement speed for minor expedition might actually be beneficial in some scenarios. Siphon Spirit just acts as another way to apply minor magic steal. If you need a shield, you can run Annulment, either morph. Doesn't really matter which one you choose. If you are running Zen, make sure to have things like Soul Trap unlocked. In the Major Skilled line, have Entropy, have Scalding Rune unlocked. Those are all very important to have unlocked if you are the Zen's healer. Not much else here. On the Undaunted line, you want to have all these abilities unlocked here. Fulfilling Altar applies minor lifesteal and provides another synergy, so Blood Feast. So nice for activating Alkosh, Muntina, Lakestes, as well as just being a very strong synergy. It's a very powerful heal. Then you have Shadow Silk, which you're going to use for the Black Widow synergy. The synergy has been nerfed a few times, but it's essentially free damage still, so you can obviously run this if you have the bar space to do so. Make sure to have Inner Rage. This is because there are some strategies where the healer will need to taunt things, and so you're not running Sword and Board usually as a healer, so you need to pick up Inner Rage here for your taunt. Then Bone Surge for the Spinal Surge synergy. So while it does provide a damage shield, which is fairly decent, you're mainly going to use it for the Major Vitality bonus, which increases healing received. So very useful in high damage scenarios where you need additional healing done. For example, a Baneful Mark and Execute for Cloud Rest is a classic example of where you will see Bone Surge being used. And under the Alliance War line, under the support line, make sure to have Reviving Barrier. This is an ultimate you can use. It's a pretty decent ultimate, provides a pretty large damage shield for 12 people for 30 seconds, and it also has a heal over time while the shield is up, so pretty strong. Very good ultimate to run. And then you also have Efficient Purge to purge everybody of any debuffs that you might need to purge for whatever reason. There are obviously going to be fights where you will need to run Purge here and there. That pretty much covers it for all the skills. Now, in terms of healing and ESO, you kind of have two jobs. The first one is your primary role, which is just healing people, making sure nobody dies by, restoring health. But the second job is arguably just as important as the first job, and that's buffing your allies and debuffing the enemy. So, healers and tanks in ESO generally fall under what I like to prefer to call support rather than just raw healing. So while part of your job is to heal, that buffing and debuffing portion of your job is also very important. Basically, your job as a healer is also to support your DPS by allowing them to do as much damage as possible. Now, these two goals do go hand in hand with each other. The faster the DPS can kill something, the less damage you're going to take because the fight lasts for a shorter period of time. And so a lot of what we do as a healer is basically maintaining these offensive buffs and the debuffs that we place on the enemy. So just going off of our front bar here, we have two good examples of this. We have Comet Prayer for Minor Berserk, which is a pretty strong buff. Now, there are other ways to get Minor Berserk, but Comet Prayer is going to be the most consistent way to get it. And so you just want to make sure you're always having Minor Berserk active, so you're using Comet Prayer every 8 seconds at least in order to maintain maximum uptime on Minor Berserk. Then for debuff, you have Fetter Infection, which applies minor vulnerability while the dot is on them. So you have 10 seconds to basically recast Fetter Infection to make sure that minor vulnerability stays on the boss. So those are kind of the buffs, debuff moves you want to pay attention to and you want to try to maintain very good uptime on. But generally speaking, the healing part of your job is actually relatively straightforward. It's basically just a lot of layering heal over time. So in this example, we have a couple of heal over times. You have Illustrious Healing, you have Energy Orb. You can argue that Corrupting Pollen, you can basically act as a heal over time, just has a 6-second duration, and then you get a large burst heal at the end. But there are other heal over times. For example, Minor Lifesteal would act as a heal over time. And then you do have your emergency burst heals. So Enchanted Growth, for example, acts as an AoE burst heal. And when you have all of your buffs active, Major Mending, Minor Mending if you have it, your spell power potions, you can burst heal for quite a bit, especially if you manage to crit heal. It's very easy to overheal in ESO, which basically is just healing somebody when they have full health. So healing is actually the easiest part of a healer's job. The harder part, and what separates out decent healers from really great healers, is taking a look at your buff and debuff uptimes. So I already kind of covered this, but Comet Prayer is a big one here. Fetch Infection as a Warden healer is also pretty big. And then one skill to make sure to always have active is going to be Blockade for the off balance, as well as the enchant proc chance on the back bar. That pretty much covers it for Warden healing. It's a lot easier to kind of see Warden healing being done rather than explain it through words. So I do have links down in the description below for a couple of content creators, their Twitch channels or the YouTube channels. These content creators do heal at the high-end PvE level. So they are probably better resources than I am when it comes to taking a look at actual healing videos. I do have a couple of older streams where I have healed on a Warden. I also Templar heal as well on occasion, but those are far and few between, and so you might be better off taking a look at the content creators down below compared to trudging through my channel to try to find those a handful of healing videos there. But that concludes the video. If you guys have any questions at all, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I'll try to answer all of your questions to the best of my ability. Again, hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.